Hello, it's Soul with your guide to Torghast in World of Warcraft Shadowlands. This video will take you from the top to the bottom of how to access it, how it works, how to survive, and a lot of ranting towards the end. It's just a lot of miscellaneous stuff, so use the navigation bar to take you to the section that you need, and don't forget to hit the like button if you find this useful. So first things first, what is Torghast? It is a new game feature in Shadowlands with roguelike elements. In the nutshell, you start off on the bottom floor with nothing, and as you climb, you pick up bonuses, power-ups, and more to defeat bad guys that you otherwise wouldn't be able to on your own. It's WoW fanfiction come to life, where game-breaking synergies are your key to victory. Torghast is split into two different game modes, the cell blocks and the twisting corridors. Most of you are going to be farming the cell blocks, which are 6-floor climbs. On every third floor is a sort of resting floor, and every 6th floor is where a powerful boss is waiting to get its ass kicked. This is a gross oversimplification, but the strategy of running Torghast is to simply run it on as high of a difficulty as possible, suck up all the rewards that you can, and then return next week for more. Climbing the cell blocks and defeating bosses awards Soul Ash, a currency that can only be found in Torghast and is needed as one of several reagents that this guy, the mysterious rune carver, needs to make you some awesome gear. The higher the difficulty you climb each week, the closer to the maximum rewards that you get. The Twisting Corridors, on the other hand, is mostly for fun. It's an 18-floor climb, so, longer. But with a longer climb comes more anima powers. This is where you can have fun experimenting with insane builds, where you can be, almost unkillable. In the Twisting Corridors, you earn cosmetics, achievements, and at the very top, a mount to make your life in Shadowlands a lot easier. Getting started is pretty straightforward, but I'm going to summarize. Once you reach level 60 and join a covenant, you'll go on a series of quests that will eventually lead you to the Maw and back. At the Conclave in Oribos, a quest from this hunk of coal will start your adventure into Torghast proper. You'll be directed to a portal that takes you straight to the bottom floor of Torghast. You can think of it like the lobby. Once you complete this questline, the Torghast cell blocks are now unlocked. You'll also get a breadcrumb quest to access the rune carver, who has his own short questline to complete so you can start farming for legendaries. Over time, you'll be given more quests to save people who ended up getting thrown into Torghast. Once that is completed, however long that takes, the Twisting Corridors will then be unlocked. Like I said, it's fairly straightforward. Quests just drop into your lap, and you're directed where you need to go. Now for a short tour of this lobby floor. When entering, to your immediate right is a short hallway that leads you to the rune carver. Just ahead is the Great Hall. This is a public area, meaning that you're going to see people from all over popping in for shenanigans, and there's a meeting stone here in case you're with friends and they just can't be troubled to hoof it over. So here's a map of the bottom level. There are 6 cell blocks highlighted here. Each week, 2 random cell blocks are activated, and Soul Ash is available to farm for in each one, up to a weekly maximum. The remaining 4 cell blocks are closed. The Twisting Corridors is always open once it's unlocked. When entering a cell block or the Twisting Corridor, you're presented with this UI that lets you choose the layer or difficulty of your Torghast experience. Difficulties are permanently unlocked as you climb higher floors and defeat bosses, and the unlocks are shared between all the cell blocks. So for example, if you choose one cell block and run it over and over again until you unlock the highest layer, that highest layer is now accessible on every cell block permanently. The Twisting Corridors is the exception. You unlock those difficulties separately. When running cell blocks, each layer offers rewards that decrease as you climb higher to make it so that even if you're unable to climb at a certain level, you won't fall that far behind. And here's a chart to illustrate what you get at what layer. Running higher difficulties will also earn you all of the rewards from layers that you skipped, so you don't have to do like 16 runs per week. Ultimately, your weekly goal is to climb twice, once for each block, at as high of a layer as you can. Neither the cell blocks nor the Twisting Corridors need a token or a key for entry. You are free to enter and re-enter with no restrictions. So you can just dive in, experiment, and fail without penalty, other than, of course, the time spent. So let's finally walk in. One of the first things you notice is the added UI element on the right-hand side. This tells you what floor you're on, how many deaths you have remaining, and how much phantasma you have, as well as a list of all of your anima powers. Let's take a closer look. Dying in Torghast does not mean an instant ejection from Torghast, but it is the beginning of the end. At 0 deaths remaining, your next death is going to catch the attention of the Terragru. After 30 seconds, the Terragru will appear and stomp its way towards the exit of the current floor, and will kill you dead if you get close enough. If it arrives at the floor's exit or it passes your corpse, you're pretty much done, and then you're kicked out. If you can somehow make it to the next floor though, you can continue to progress, but you're just one more death away from the Terragru coming back for another round. You can replenish your death count by buying items, as I'll explain later, and you can protect yourself with a permanent buff that you can buy from a vendor outside in the maw. Phantasma is the currency of Torghast that lets you buy consumables, extra lives, even anima powers to strengthen yourself or your team. You spend it on brokers who are on every 3rd floor. Brokers also repair your gear, and while standing near them, you can change your talents, soulbinds, and specialization. The most expensive item here is the Ravenous Anima Cell, which when used on a non-elite enemy, will kill it instantly and turn into a not-so-random anima power. I'll explain strategies on this later in the guide. Phantasma is mostly earned from killing enemies, but can also be found by breaking pots scattered throughout the dungeon, and can sometimes be contained in an anima power like boom, here's a few hundred Phantasma, have a great day. Phantasma lives and dies in your current climb. Anything that you earn will be taken away when your climb ends, so the rule of thumb here is to spend as you go, but spend wisely. Finally, there's a button here that when pressed will show you all of the anima powers that you currently possess, to which right now, you don't have any. Fortunately, hey, your first power is right here waiting for you as soon as you start your climb. Clicking on it will give you a selection of powers to choose from that range anywhere between cool and shockingly overpowered. We'd be here all day if I talked about all of the anima powers available, but later in the guide I'll point out some best practices and general powers that I think are totally awesome. So where do you get anima powers? Mostly exploring. Anima powers are sometimes just right out in the open. They can be found in large urns, which are pretty easy to identify. At the end of every floor is an empowered guardian who you have to defeat in order to progress, and they always drop an anima power too. Some mobs carry anima powers with them as well, you just can't see it, unless you or someone in your group has a special anima power that lets you see who has one. This is an extremely useful power at higher difficulties or speedruns where you want to go for what's most important. Also, when climbing Torghast, you'll run into numerous opportunities for anima powers and buffs, like treasure chests with puzzles. This one needs you to find 3 keys scattered throughout the floor. This one needs you to press buttons until all the lights disappear. And this one needs you to put the levers in a specific combination, and you're gonna hate it. This one's just gonna drive you nuts. And there are more puzzles to mess with you too. The prize here? Anima powers. As you climb, you'll also run into many forms of souls that need to be freed. Each one you free adds 1% to your main stat. If you're in a group, anima powers are clickable by everyone in the group, and the bonuses from freeing souls is also shared with everyone. So thorough exploration goes a really long way. There are also denizens of the Shadowlands who could use your help finding comrades or objects of value somewhere on that particular floor. Helping them gets you more anima power. Skipping them will not get you that anima power. And finally, there are rares. Tough elite mobs with special abilities and unique anima powers that can be pretty game-breaking. So as said, you're going to run into a lot of anima powers to use and abuse. Considering the scope of Torghast, it's a little bit hard to talk you through how to clear each and every cell block. Torghast changes all the time, from the mob types to the floor configurations to what rares appear to bosses, and of course, the anima powers that you get. There are just too many variables to consider, but what we'll do here is visit each cell block, and I'll give you some general tips that are unique to each one. Skuldus Halls is like the vanilla of Torghast, and you're going to see many mob types from here spill into the other cell blocks. The chief threat that you'll find here are the moss-worn guards, armored melee beefcakes who are pretty dumb, but they really pack a wallop. They cast an ability to increase their strength, but it can be interrupted, but they also have an ability called Massive Strike, which does huge frontal cone damage. At high levels, this can one-shot a non-tank unless you pick up a lot of anima powers to increase your HP pool by a lot, but you're better off just dodging anyway. By themselves, these guys aren't a big deal really, unless you're not paying attention, because moss-worn shacklers are usually nearby too. They snare you and otherwise lock you down, long enough to make massive strikes a lot harder to avoid. Finally, Mossworn Interceptors don't do much damage, but every now and then they use a critical strike that deals huge damage and cannot be avoided if it goes off. I mentioned the Ravenous Animacell, the really expensive thing that you can buy from brokers that turn mobs into powers. Using the Animacell here on this floor doesn't seem to give very interesting powers, other than an ability to passively free nearby souls. For now, I wouldn't waste the 250 Phantasma needed for what's really a pretty weak buff. At high levels, Skuldus Halls applies a Torment debuff called Eye of Skuldus. When out of combat for 30 to 40 seconds, an ad spawns next to you and attacks. They're not trivial, but they're not anything that you can't handle once you have a handful of powers. I'm going to be mentioning more of these Torments as we go through the different cell blocks. Torments are extra buffs or debuffs that are applied at higher difficulties. If you enter Torghast and you see a Torment debuff on your screen, just keep in mind that every time you climb a floor, with the exception of a broker floor, the Torment debuff will go up, making your climb that much harder. Moving on, the Fracture Chambers steps it up a notch. Many of the same mobs from Skuldus Halls are here, but the biggest addition are little skeletons that often run in dense packs. These skeletons can be a lot of trouble for melee or tank classes because upon death they explode and apply a stacking physical damage debuff. If you're in a group and happen to have anima powers that deal AoE damage like Malrad explosions, it can be very easy to be accidentally one-shot because a half dozen skeletons blew up in your face. These skeletons can be stunned, snared, and otherwise kited around while you let the debuff fall off. Ravenous Animacells are also not recommended here, but you can use one on a skeleton for a chance to have a minion of your own for the remainder of your climb. They do okay damage, but it's really not anything to write home about. The Torment that applies here is called Fracturing Forces. Basically, a roguelike mob will pop in and try to stab you dead. Just make it dead first. The Soul Forges is where things really heat up. Haha, sorry about that. While including many of the mobs from Skuldus Halls and Fractured Chambers, many more appear that have fire-based abilities. The worst of them is the Mossworn Flame Tender, a caster who channels a heal that if not stunned or interrupted will heal everyone around them nearly to full life. This is a top priority mob in case you happen to run into these in a pack. The Soul Forges also features many casters who fire off spells in quick succession, so they're going to eat up your CC abilities very quickly. My advice here would be to pick up powers that help you interrupt mobs or stun. The Torment here, Soul Forge Heat, is arguably the most painful of all the Torments in Torghast. Every 5 seconds, it deals damage equal to a percentage of your total life. At maximum difficulty, this starts off at 6% and tops off at 10% per 5 seconds on the boss floor. The Ravenous Animacell is extremely powerful here, and maybe it's a must-have. Using it on any fire-based mob will grant you a power that reduces your fire damage taken by 65%, and this includes the Torment, making heavy exploration worth doing until you get to that 3rd floor. The upper reaches doesn't have the painful torment that the Soul Forges has, but it still offers a lot of challenge. Elite mobs are more numerous here than the other cell blocks, and those awful skeletons are back too. The Torment to deal with here, Might of the Upper Reaches, increases physical damage taken, so certain melee-based elites can be especially deadly here, not to mention the skeletons, and their debuff. I really don't like the skeletons. On top of that, there's no super awesome or game-breaking anima power to obtain through Ravenous cells. That combination makes this one of my least favorite cell blocks to climb. Coldheart Interstitia is a departure from the previously mentioned cell blocks. This one is populated by Dark Kyrian, Valkyr-looking humanoids with kind of obnoxious abilities. What makes them obnoxious is that many of them use ranged abilities, but none of them are as dangerous as the Coldheart Agent. It casts a fear that can be extremely deadly if not interrupted. Also during your climb, you want to watch the ground. Targetable and untargetable Coldheart ambushers will occasionally slam the ground, knocking you back. This means in theory you can get knocked off and to your death. The Torment on this cell block is called Breath of Coldheart, which increases the HP of all mobs by a percentage. There's nothing special about that, but it certainly comes into play when dealing with elites and bosses at high levels. The special anima power here is called Dark Armaments, which gives a stack and haste buff on kill, so it's basically a kill streak power. It won't be useful for bosses, but it really shines when you have full stacks and can just unload on elites. Even Malrats count towards keeping your streak up. And finally, there's Mortregar, an outdoor cell block full of these shade-like mobs. A unique feature of this cell block is that most of the mobs here leave an expanding pool upon death. This deals damage and grows over time. That can make combat here more restrictive than it first appears. The mobs here are low-key dangerous, some of which cast an AoE at a targeted area, which you really should move out of. Most of the melee-based mobs can hit especially hard every third or fourth swing. You want to be careful pulling too many of these at once, because then all of those mobs will throw that heavy punch all at once, which might overwhelm you. A particularly nasty mob in here is the Dark Soul Chorus, an elite that casts Death Blast. Each cast will lower your healing taken until you can't be healed at all, so prioritize or lock this one down if it gets into combat. The torment here is Mortregar's Echoes that increases magic damage taken by a percentage. You can sort of negate this torment with good play, but you just need to be careful. The Ravenous Anima Cell really comes into play here if you need it. Just use it on any of the shade-looking mobs and take its power to not just negate the damage that you take from the pools corpses leave behind, they now heal you. You could also absorb the pools as they shrink until they're gone. The Twisting Corridors is pretty easy to explain. It's divided into 3 randomly chosen cell blocks that you run consecutively in a single session. So it's not a short climb, but the premise is the same. Every 3rd floor has a vendor to sell you stuff. Every 6th floor has a vendor and a boss. Defeating the boss will score you an epic anima power, and by the 18th floor, depending on how thorough your explanation was and your luck with anima powers, you might be unstoppable. The counterbalance to that? Well, at very high layers or difficulties, torments are in play, meaning that they can stack. In theory, it is possible that you can hit the Soul Forges 3 times in a row and take nearly unsustainable damage every few seconds, so I hope you picked up some good anima powers. As mentioned earlier, there are upgrades to your Torghast experience that can be purchased outside using Stygia, found from farming the Maw. The perks are pretty neat, and are mostly for giving you more anima powers, but from looking at it, none of the perks here are what I would consider must-haves. Torghast is a pretty cool solo experience, but it can be enjoyed in groups as well. Torghast will scale based on the number of people, as well as the roles that were selected. So here's some quick pointers. In a group, deaths are shared, so if you're the jackass who pulled a whole room and got everyone killed, that's a great way to get kicked. Some anima powers don't necessarily need to be picked up by everybody. Only one person is really needed to track mobs that carry anima powers, and only one person is needed to maybe pick up all the Phantasma bonuses, so that on the 3rd floor, they can buy the anima cells that can be used for everyone, while the others buy their own individual powers or consumables. The larger the group, the more organized that it should be. A duo containing one healer can probably handle anything, but in a full group, you probably want to consider someone to lead pulls, be primary on interrupts, or even tank. Communication during the run is important because anima powers can quickly cause these roles to change. Suddenly your healer might also be your designated Maw Rat bomb person. Now I've done a lot of testing of Torghast since the alpha. Despite that, it's a little bit hard to give tips on every single mob type and anima power combination for every class, otherwise you'd be here forever. The earlier parts of this guide should be more than enough to keep you on your feet. The rest is up to you to discover. But that said, I still have some general best practices and tips. Go at your pace, whether you're a go kind of person, or you want to have an epic climb through the scary labyrinth. The first 2 floors of your climb are the hardest because you start with only the one anima power at the beginning. Torghast is designed in such a way that full exploration and reasonable decision making on your anima powers will almost guarantee you a win by the time you get to the boss floor. Getting more powers early on will make you stronger sooner, and thus your run more successful. There's a certain timing involved when choosing powers. A 25% Phantasma bonus is great on early floors, but it's something you can skip when you're close to the final floor. There's also a power that increases your HP for every Maw Rat that you kill, but if there are only a few floors left before fighting the boss, well, don't bother. Most of the damage proccing abilities like Lightning Dust or Corruption Antenna stack. They might not be super impressive on their own, but a few stacks of these will make you ridiculously powerful. Some powers give strong bonuses, but have heavy penalties like reducing your healing. These don't work so great if you're running solo, but if you're in a group with a healer, hey, go for it. Stat bonuses are additive and not multiplicative, so don't be surprised if your secondary stats rise to crazy levels. There's a power that gives you what's the equivalent of Divine Shield for a full 90 seconds. if you happen to see this power shortly before the boss floor, as in not choose it, and then activate it when the time is right. You can also gamble with the regular anima cells that you buy off the brokers. Just hoard them all for the boss floor, pop them all at once, and hope that one of them has that immunity buff. Speaking of the brokers, don't forget to repair. I know that I said that earlier, but I know that I tend to forget that a lot. Cell blocks are shorter climbs than the twisting corridors, meaning that there are fewer powers to collect in preparation for the boss floor. Especially early on, if you're trying to clear the hardest difficulty at low gear levels, squeezing a little bit more damage out with anima powers is arguably your best approach. That and going with a healer. Maybe go with a healer, yeah. When it comes to deciding your anima powers, focus on making up for weaknesses that are apparent in your class, your spec, or your role. A healer without interrupts can pick up a power that lets them outrange casters, forcing them to move and otherwise interrupting their cast. Range classes can pick up another power that knocks back enemies that strike them at melee range. Tanks can pick up damage procs that deal high single target damage. If you lack self-healing, some anima powers provide this while others give you the crowd control that you need to power through. Just make sure you bring a few stacks of food. Sometimes though, the powers might not go your way, but even then, well, maybe you just gotta go with the flow. Exploding maw rats might not seem cool, but if that's the hand that's been dealt, give it a go. You might actually like it. Sometimes on floors you'll see escaped prisoners like plant people, fire elementals, or zombie-looking mobs. They're aggressive to you too, but they start off engaged with the denizens of Torghast. You can use ranged single-target abilities to defeat the most dangerous mobs, and for the most part the other mobs won't notice you. Just don't get too close. Sorry, melee. And finally, there is a DPS check in Torghast. At higher layers, elites, rares, and bosses have a buff called Unnatural Power. It's a buff that stacks the longer that they're in combat, granting them additional damage and run speed, and at 10 stacks they're immune to all forms of CC. You can skip elites, and you can skip rares, but if the boss encounter feels like a wall, it's time to reassess where mistakes may have been made, or the kind of gear that you have. Torghast is one of the most radical features that WoW has introduced. Fun and spectacle comes first, and balance is pretty much thrown out the window. I've probably put nearly 100 hours into it, and I've barely scratched the surface between all the classes and roles because eventually I want to solo all of it. And there are the special events that will occasionally occur that aren't mentioned in this guide. I'll be sure to cover those in greater detail once they're available. I know I didn't exactly take you on a path to victory, but with this guide I sure hope that it helped. If so, please like the video and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. We'll see you in the Shadowlands. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.